Hi everyone, welcome back to the Who We Are podcast. Today I am beyond excited to introduce a guest whose work has shaped how I think about time, productivity, and living a meaningful life. A few years ago, I came across 4,000 Weeks, the book by Oliver Burkeman, which after Adam Grant highly recommended it. And it totally shifted my perspective on how we approach time in our daily lives. Oliver Burkeman is the author of 4,000 Weeks, which presents a radical yet refreshing idea that our time is finite. Roughly about 4,000 weeks if we're lucky to live up to 80 years old. Instead of constantly chasing more productivity, we should embrace the limitations of life. So this message, although I found it a little daunting at first, really opens up the opportunity to focus on what really matters and let go of the endless pursuit of doing it all. And now Oliver has also released a follow-up work called Meditations for Mortals, which I'm so excited to dive deeper into, which really takes these themes, from 4,000 weeks even deeper. In Meditations for Mortals, Oliver offers meditative reflections on mortality, mindfulness, and how embracing life's impermanence can actually lead to a richer, more fulfilling existence. Hi, Oliver. Welcome to the show. For those of us who may not be as familiar with you, could you introduce and let us know a little bit about yourself and what you're so passionate about?
Sure. I'm Oliver Burkeman. I'm an author and a journalist, and I wrote, among other things, a book called 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals, and a new book called Meditations for Mortals. I guess what I have discovered I am passionate about is the question of how to build a meaningful life in the world in which we live. I worked for a long time in the United States and now live in northern England. And wherever I travel, it seems that I'm pursuing this question of how to sort of make the best of this strange era that we live in.
Yeah, so let's dive in. 4,000 Weeks has been a book that has really resonated deeply with so many readers. What inspired you to approach time management through the lens of our finite time on Earth?
I mean, long story short, I wrote about this in a newspaper in the UK, The Guardian, for a long time and tested out lots of different systems and found that none of them brought me to this state of paradise that I was seeking. And so this really was the book that came after that kind of, a disillusionment. And I think that the reason to your question is that an awful lot of the ways that we approach time, productivity, work-life balance, all these things, they're all, a lot of the time, what we're doing is we're trying to deny our finitude, our limited time and our limited control.
Yeah.
And a lot of self-help gurus are actually quite ready to help us deny that, right? That to sort of offer these systems that you think to yourself, well, if I really pursue it properly, maybe I won't have to make any tough choices about time. Maybe I will be able to just endlessly keep on increasing my capacities. And I wanted, first of all, to say, I don't think that's true. And secondly, I think it's actually liberating to realize that it's not true, right? I don't think that this is a depressing conclusion at all. I think that once we begin to face up to the truth of our limitations, that's really when true, meaningful productivity can begin.
I love that because in the book, you frame time as this limited, almost existential concept, something that we often overlook in our busy lives. And, the idea, like you said earlier, that we only have 4,000 weeks to live on average is both, like you said, liberating. And for me, I found it a little daunting in the beginning. You also critique, productivity culture, especially in a world today that constantly pushes us to do more, be more, achieve more. You argue that, trying to manage and control time too tightly actually stops us from living fully. Mm-hmm. Could you expand a little on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that at the heart of it, I suppose, is that we have a tendency to relate to time as a resource, as something we have to try to get the maximum value out of. And that's not false, right? That there is an aspect to time that is like that. But the big problem is that if you take that too far, essentially, then you turn the whole of life into this effort to sort of reach a future point. You're instrumentalizing all of your time. Everything is all for the future moment at which you finally get everything organized. Or maybe for some people, it's when they retire or when they make partner, or, all sorts of different sort of milestones, but it's always in the future. And, in the meantime, actually trying to become more optimized and more efficient on a personal level can very often just leave you busier and more stressed because, well, we can talk about that. But, if you get really good at answering email very quickly, all you find is that you just get many more emails, right? You don't get to the point where the emails stop because the emails never stop. So it's really about giving up this notion that we're going to get our arms around everything, and instead learning to kind of swim in this infinite ocean of possibilities and obligations and demands that we face in the world. Just sort of navigating through that with no expectation that you're somehow going to be a superhuman. And as I say, I actually think, in my experience, is that although it feels like a kind of a defeat or a surrender, right? It feels like I'm saying, give up on a certain way of thinking. Actually, that's the beginning of more time, more meaningful productivity, more energy, more focus. Like, good things follow from this seemingly alarming initial discovery, as it were.
A lot of us sometimes feel like we're constantly running out of time, which is also, similar to the concept that you mentioned in the book called Existential Overwhelm. So many of us feel scattered, like we're rushing through life, but never catching up. Do you think, Oliver, this stems from a deeper fear of missing out? Or what is it? What is it that drives this sensation?
Yeah, I mean, the reason I wanted to bring in that term existential overwhelm is just that it's very easy to think that overwhelm just means too many chores, too many errands on the to-do list, right? It's like too many things that we have to do but don't really want to do. But in fact, the nature of the modern world, especially in the era of digital communication, is that it's very easy to be overwhelmed by things you don't want to do, and also by things you kind of do want to do, right? So if you are someone who has the financial means to travel, for example, then instantly all the choices about all the places you could go, the bucket list, as it were, all the, if you're an entrepreneur, right, all the business ideas you might want to launch, all the books you want to read, right, or articles online. I mean, it's these are all good things, but it's still
never ending,
right. They still feel very overwhelming. And I think that, if we're just going to go for a moment right down to the sort of fundamental philosophical issues here, I think that kind of fear of missing out is really the fact that we're not fully comfortable, and who is, right, with the fact that we are mortal, with the fact that our time is going to run out. Every time you sort of have to choose not to spend the day doing activity A because you're going to spend it doing activity B at work instead of with your family instead of moving forward in your work. That's a sort of small version of the bigger fact that eventually we're not going to be here anymore, and we're going to miss out on everything that happens, centuries and millennia into the future. So I think that in a way when we try to get our arms around everything, we're trying to feel like we're not limited, because it's actually very uncomfortable to face and to sort of feel what it feels like to really be a finite and limited human. But in a way, the way out of this is to see that it's just completely beyond hope. I know I'm sounding depressing again when I'm actually trying to say something optimistic, but like, the thing about the fear of missing out is, like, you're gonna miss out on almost everything. That's just built in. And once you realize that, instead of spending your days desperately trying to make sure you don't miss out on anything, you can just say, okay, that's what it means to be human. So given that I'm going to miss out on almost everything, what is the handful of things I'm actually going to choose to be part of and to experience and to be present for? And I think it's a much more relaxing, but also more sort of experience rich way of living.
Wow. It's like making peace with mortality, or making peace with our limitations. One of the most liberating and challenging ideas in your book is to let go of things that we think we should accomplish.
Mm-hmm.
How can we start to identify what really matters in a world that's full of opportunities and also pressures?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. And obviously it would be a bit too easy, wouldn't it, to say, as many people in the personal development space have said, you just choose what you want to do and don't worry about all the rest of it. Obviously people are in contexts. They have bills to pay and rent to pay and families to support and all the rest of it. I think the thing that can be really helpful there, one thing that can be really helpful there, and this is more coming on to the themes of my latest book, I guess, is that there's a very deep sense in which you always have a choice. Now there's a superficial sense of this, which really annoys me, that you come across in self-help culture all the time, which just says like, hey, just choose wealth and you'll be rich, and choose love and you'll find romance. But I don't mean that. What I mean is it's more something I would associate with the existentialist philosophers, perhaps, which is that actually you are always choosing what you do. So even if you choose, to give an example, if you choose to carry on working in a job that you don't really like because it's the best way to support your family and you care about supporting your family, well, it's technically true that you could choose not to do that, right? You could leave the job, you could fail to support your family and all the rest of it. But you choose to keep doing it because the value that is guiding you is that it matters to you to support your family. So when you see that choice that you have, even if it wouldn't be realistic to take the other choice, right? Even if there's no question of your carrying on doing it, you still have asserted a kind of choice, in the sense that, like Jean-Paul Sartre or the other existentialists would mean it. You're still saying, like, I'm not doing this because just sort of I have to, or that's the way it is. I'm doing it because in the situation in which I find myself in this life, in this country, at this time in history, that is the best way for me to do something that I deeply care about, which is to provide for my family. And of course, the other thing that then happens is that people who think in this way realize, oh, actually, I had a bit more choice, a bit more room for maneuver than I realized. Maybe I could change jobs. Maybe I could ask for different work. There's all sorts of different kinds of wiggle room that we end up having. But I think it's really important to see that there is always, in some sense, a choice.
But sometimes I also feel like in a world that constantly encourages us to push beyond our limits, this can also feel counterintuitive.
Yeah.
How can we break out of this cycle?
Yeah, it's such a good question. Sometimes people say to me, like, but hang on a minute, if people didn't try to exceed their limits, like, we would never have gone into outer space and the iPhone would never have been invented and all these things. And I think really there's just a confusion there about language on one level. I think that I'm not talking about lacking ambition. In fact, on the contrary, I'm talking about the idea that if you want to be free to pursue your ambitions, you had better understand your limitations when it comes to handling email or, all sorts of things. So one example, I don't know what your listeners or viewers will make of this, but is this idea of choosing what to fail at, which I've written about, where, if you're very committed to your career and you're very committed to your family, then maybe for the next 6 months of your life, you're not going to be able to be very committed to sort of keeping a wonderfully tidy home or doing more in your sort of fitness goals than just maintaining your fitness, which obviously one should. Maybe that's going to be the season. Maybe the season for that will be at another time.
I also, in reading the book 4,000 Weeks, I realized also that your approach to time management is more philosophical compared to the typical life hacks that we see, or like you said, the self-help out there. How do you think society's obsession with optimizing everything affects our overall well-being?
I think it's broadly negative because I think that I understand why people feel that pressure, right? And the culture in which we live now is so completely, it feels like you have no option but to become more and more and more efficient all the time. But, what this ends up doing in your life is it creates a standard that you can't ever meet, because the the incoming supply of emails or things to read or things that need to be done, it's basically infinite. And so if you get better and better and better at processing an infinite supply of something, you still never get to the end of it because it's infinite, right? So all that happens is you just sort of keep going. You feel like you must be going to get there sometime. I've spoken to so many people who resonate with this feeling that like it's just a few months away. If they really give it one last push, they'll finally get on top of everything and then it'll all be plain sailing. And of course that never happens because we're in this situation of infinite inputs. So listen, there's nothing wrong with some optimization and efficiency. You know, I like to say if it takes you half an hour to find your clothes in the morning or something, then there's probably something you need to make more efficient in your life. Sure, whatever. But if you think that efficiency is going to solve the big problem of, you know, being alive in the modern world, that's where the mistake comes, because it won't get you there. You won't get to this point of sort of absolute freedom from limitation. You still are going to have to, the most optimized person on the planet still has to make these tough choices about, well, am I going to focus more of my life on this or more of my life on the other thing? And I think sort of accepting that is the critical step.
So if someone's listening to you, you know, is thinking, okay, so Oliver, if optimization is not the right focus, what then is the right focus?
Well, I think the simplest way of putting it really is that it is being willing, it's developing the willingness to neglect some things in favor of some other things. I give a very simple example, and then obviously other people might want to have more sort of personalized versions of it. But a very simple example of this is just to keep 2 to-do lists, right? So you keep one list which is open. It has everything on your plate. Maybe it has 400 items on it. It could go on and on and on and on and on forever. You just put everything there that is in any way part of your world. And then you have another list which has a limited number of slots on it. So say 5 slots, right? It only has 5 spaces on it. And the idea of this method is that you feed things over from the long list to the short list. You just pick 5 things to fill those slots. And then the rule that you follow is that you can't bring anything else from the long list until you've freed up a slot by doing that item. So you create a sort of a deliberate bottleneck, as it were, in your task management. You say, until I've done at least some of these 5, everything else has to wait. Now, anybody who has more complicated approaches to task management will not want to just do that. They'll have some other version of it. But the principle there is the one where you're saying to yourself, look, I'm a limited, finite human being. I actually only can work on a few things at once. That was already true before I introduced any system of 2 to-do lists or anything.
Yeah.
All that's happening here is we're bringing it into our consciousness and we're saying, look, this is the way it is. So let's make good choices. And then you immediately start seeing it's like, okay, well, that dealing with that problem in my work is important, but it's not actually as important as this one. So I'm okay letting that wait while I get this done. It's a very satisfying way to make progress on things.
Yeah, no, that is actually very actionable and very helpful for us, you know, to start this journey of being more mindful on what we're focusing on. You know, in your latest book, and congratulations, in Meditations for Mortals, you explore how mindfulness and reflection can help us come to terms with our finite existence. How can these practices help us navigate daily life with more intention and peace, especially in a world filled with distractions?
Yeah. Well, I mean, what I wanted to do in this book was to sort of turn the book itself into a kind of an exercise in meditation. So it's not really about, you know, sitting in lotus position on a meditation cushion and following your breath. Like, that's great. That's great. But it's not the focus of the book. The book is divided into 4 weeks, and each week is divided into 7 short chapters. And look, obviously you don't have to follow my rules, but the idea is that you might read one of these chapters each day for a month. And what I'm trying to do is kind of offer these little tiny perspective shifts in the direction of what we're talking about, right? In the direction of embracing limitation. I think one of the things that one of the problems that we fall into is thinking, well, okay, first of all, I've got to make my focus, my attention really, really solid and strong. And then I won't be distracted by anything. And then I can really get down to the things that I want to do. There are a lot of issues with that, right? And in some ways, human attention is not designed to be so strictly controlled. And so what I'm trying to do in this book is to say, well, look, if you read one of these chapters first thing in the morning with your coffee or something, and it just by sort of 2% changed how you dealt with some challenge that came up in the day, right in the middle of all the distraction and the overwhelm and the other stuff, right? Not some perfect plan to put into practice later on. That little 2% change is so much more valuable, I think, because we're very prone, or people like me, I don't know about you, are very prone to thinking, okay, I've got a great new system. I'm going to do it perfectly, but I'm going to wait for a couple of months until I've got all this other stuff out of the way first. And never happened. So I really wanted it to be about like, what could you do just in a very slightly different way, but literally today, today.
And another key takeaway, from your work is the importance of being present. What practices or habits help you personally, Oliver, stay grounded in the present moment?
It's such a challenge because actually there's this kind of ironic problem where if you try too hard to sort of be in the moment, then you're not in the moment anymore. You're just sitting there thinking like, am I in the moment enough? Am I enjoying this enough? And,
stressing about it.
Yeah. I think we all have this experience of like looking at a beautiful sunset or being in the presence of a newborn baby or something. And for a moment, it's just wonderful. And then a little thought occurs like, I've got to make sure I'm really present for this. And then it's all over. Then you're not present anymore.
Yes.
So I think really what this comes down to is, first of all, understanding that, we all always are present in the moment, whether we like it or not. Even our worries about the future or regrets about the past, they all do happen in the present moment. It's all we ever have. And so when it comes to kind of productivity and getting things done, one thing that I find very useful is this idea that I took from Carl Jung. You're only ever really responsible for the very next moment in your life, right? So if you're looking at your life and it just feels overwhelming and like, how are you going to put in place all the things you need for financial security or for your family or for fulfillment over the next year or decade or lifetime? Actually, it's always just the next moment that you have the control over. That's the bit where you have to make a wise decision if you can. So it's high pressure because it's on you to make a good decision, but it's low stakes because it's just the next moment and then just the next moment after that and just the next moment after that. So you don't even have to kind of get through the day. You just have to get through a moment.
Wow, that's beautiful, Oliver. I love the way you say that because I think, there's so much pressure to make the most of every minute to achieve as much as we can. And sometimes the pressure can be paralyzing, and what you just shared also allows us to make a little peace with the idea that we can't control everything, right. Especially in a world today where, all of us want to control everything. And sometimes, enough is enough and just focusing on the next moment. And I think that is very, very helpful reminder to all of us. Many of us also tie our sense of self-worth to how much we do or accomplish.
Yeah.
But I love that your message shifts that perspective, suggesting that we find meaning in what we don't do. How can we get comfortable with leaving things undone and not checking every box?
Well, in the new book, I have this phrase, productivity debt, which is just my way of talking about this feeling that so many of us have. I think you get up in the morning and it's like you owe the world a certain amount of output, productivity, and you don't quite feel that you're okay as a person, that you're enough as a person until you've done it. So it's like having a bank account which is in overdraft, right? And the very best you could hope for if you really worked hard that day is that you might get back up to zero, which is a really depressing way to go through the day. And I think that, obviously, if you have a job, you work for a salary or wage or something, you do owe a certain kind of productivity. That's true, but not in a kind of existential sense. It's not about whether you've justified your existence on the planet. And I think what's going on there is that we are comparing ourselves and what we've done in the day always to this kind of infinite list of all the things we could have done. So even if I have the best day ever today and I cross 70 things off my to-do list, well, there's still 700 more that it would have been good to do. So I'm never going to feel good if I'm making that comparison. What I strongly encourage people to do, if they can instead, is to make the other comparison, to compare what you have done with the day to what you would have done if you'd done nothing with that day. And that's where the idea that I write about of keeping a done list is can be quite a sort of revealing practice. You just literally keep another list alongside your to-do lists, whatever, on a phone, on a notepad. You keep a list of the things that you accomplished through the day as you accomplish them. And they can be very small things, right? You can put very tiny accomplishments onto this list if you want. And there, what's happening is that you really see accumulating this kind of satisfying list of things that you did do with your day. And it helps shift your focus away from this comparison all the time with the infinite amount of things that there are left to do. Because if you compare your output to an infinite amount of output, your self-worth is always going to take a hit from that, right? Because that's just how infinity works. You're never going to feel like you measure up.
It's true.
If you're measuring yourself up against something that nobody could ever reach.
Oliver, I'm so curious to know, what is your definition of success?
It's such a good question. I tend to sort of avoid getting too specific about what I think a successful life looks like, because I think it is so intensely personal. And there will be people for whom that is something much more to do with travel and seeing the world and material wealth. And there'll be people who it's much more to do with the strength of their family relationships. And there are cultural differences here as well. It's all very complicated. But I really like what Joseph Campbell, the famous scholar of myth, once said, which is that what people are looking for in life, they say they're looking for the meaning of life, but what they're really looking for, he said, is a feeling of aliveness. And I think that is a very good thought to bear in mind, that there's something about sort of being fully alive and really feeling oneself present in the world. Now, it's difficult to put words on it, but I think a lot of people know it when they experience it. And the answer to a successful life is whatever leads to more of that in your life, if you're really honest with yourself. And for some people, that might be, entrepreneurial success that really makes them feel sort of vividly present and vibrantly alive. For other people, it might be the case that it's really more domestic things that bring that on, or getting to pursue a creative practice outside of their work. It's just a very good question to ask, to make sure that you don't fall into that trap of always expecting success or the fulfillment of success to come later, right? It's I think we can always, whatever our situation, make choices that move us in the direction of that feeling of aliveness. And that's just the most useful way to navigate through.
It's so beautiful. Oliver, you could have a billboard down the streets where everyone in the world gets to see. What would your billboard say? What is that message that you would want the world to see?
The first billboard could say something like, "This is it," right? This is it. I think that's the thing that we so easily forget as finite creatures, is that right here and now is where meaning has got to be made if we're going to have a meaningful life. It's here and now. It's not later. It's not once you've got everything sorted out. It's this is it. The other one, which I think I'm well aware that most people seeing the billboard would just think was tremendously depressing, and it isn't. I really insist that it isn't. Would say some, and I'll try to explain this. Would say something like, "It's already too late." And what I mean by this phrase is not just give up because everything's terrible. What I mean is, we're already living imperfect lives. We've already failed to keep everybody in our lives happy all the time. We've already failed to only produce perfect work or to only be happy and upbeat all the time. And to me, that's just a wonderfully liberating message, because now I can stop trying to maintain my perfect track record, right? And I can just roll up my sleeves and dive in and commit to relationships and launch projects and go and have experiences, because I'm no longer trying to keep this kind of perfect feeling that I'm doing it all perfectly, because it's already too late for that. So I can let go of that and plunge into life. However, if the billboard needed that much explaining, it probably wouldn't be a very good billboard, would it? It would distract motorists.
No, but I really love that, Oliver. Like, it's such an interesting concept, and sometimes it's almost like a jolt, or something that you need to shake you up from, like that lofty expectation sometimes that we have in our heads, that we need all the ducks in a row to start, or we need everything perfectly aligned for us to do or try, and I think that is such a great reminder for all of us and everyone that's tuning in. What other last message or word do you want to share with all of us?
I think that we don't need to make our sense of self-worth conditional on a level of productivity or a level of energy or a level of perfection that we can't actually reach. And it's not just you, it's everybody immediately behind their, inside their minds. They're not always telling you about it, but everybody is in the same situation of only being able to do so much, only being able to understand so much about the world, feeling anxious about the future. And I find something very, very reassuring in that notion that we're sort of all in the same boat. Not everyone admits it, but everyone is experiencing it.